Good afternoon. My name is Geordie Greig. I'm the editor-in-chief of The Independent, and it is my pleasure to have this panel of titans of what is called local news. I always think local news sounds slightly patronizing in this country. These are the people who break the stories, who create the idiom which allows us to have democracy, how light can be shone, and we've got three people who've done that in an innovative and interesting and successful way. I just wanted to begin with a definition of local. W.H. Auden talked about a poet's hope. To be like some valley cheese, local, but prized everywhere. So what we've got here are three people who've chosen to go back to the roots of where we all are, to find the stories which affect us, and I think to create one of the most important and significant pillars of protecting democracy. We have Andrew Lack here, who's got more Emmys than most people have breakfasts. He's the former NBC chairman. He founded Mississippi Today, gone back to his roots, and has found a route forward to be exciting and innovative and profitable.
That is sweet. Thank you very much.
It's going to get worse, don't worry.
Okay. No. I knew it would.
No, it will. It definitely will. We'll see. So we've got Akash, who's the co-founder and editor-in-chief of New York Focus. Let's just remember, New York is a huge, huge place to look at from a journalistic point of view. The budget alone of the state is $250 billion. 90% of the countries in the world have a smaller budget. Here we have a David taking on a Goliath. With Rozina Breen, who is a byword with what she's done with the UK's Bureau of Investigative Journalism to look at difficult things, justice, inequality, communities who sometimes get ignored, and to find paths and to integrate with communities which make impact and create what we all want to do, surprises, to learn, and to have agenda. Andrew, I'm going to begin with you. You ran one of the most powerful, largest news organizations in the US. What made you go back to local? What is the power of local?
Well, you touched on it in your sweet introduction. Family. My family roots are in Mississippi. And everything, all the good luck and fortune I had in those big jobs you described came from the Mississippi Delta, where my grandfather was an immigrant, came in a very typical way to the country, to the US, and did well, and sent his son, who was my grandfather actually, my great-grandfather was the first generation, sent him to New York and said, go do better than I can do here. And he did. And so I got a decent education and a good life in journalism, and that's why I'm in Mississippi.
But was there a sense of trying to tip up the narrative to find a way to let truth escape?
Yeah, and the bar, if I may say gently and shyly from my colleagues and friends in Mississippi, it was a low bar to climb over. Mississippi is the poorest state in the United States of America. And I came from the poorest city in the poorest state in the United States of America. So there's a lot to do there, a lot of work to be done. And the news, the traditional newspapers were shrinking. There was less news, and there was certainly less investigative news and holding power to account in a state that is a supermajority in the legislature, where one party really can dictate what the law is and all that.
Yeah, and you've made deep effect, so congratulations on that. With Akash, you're the founder of a news website which has a huge target. How do you find the rhythm and route to make impact in New York when there are quite large, quite well-known newspapers in that city, which are your competition?
Right. There are many large newspapers in New York, and as a result, I think people assume that New York is, one place in the world is well covered. It's got to be New York. overwhelmingly those publications are pivoting to national and global audiences. And there's an enormous desert in New York, specifically on the state level. Albany, which New York focuses on, wields an enormous amount of power over every locality in the state, including New York City. So in New York City, which is initially sort of, I grew up there, it's what I cared about. I worked in New York City politics for a while and was on my local community board. It turns out that what happens in the governor's mansion is 10 times more important than what happens in City Hall or Great City Mansion, and yet gets a tenth of the coverage. And so we focus on Albany, and we sort of we deliberately look for stories that others aren't covering.
Who are your readers? Are they easy to define, or is it quite broad?
Yeah, we have. So we started and we maintain an audience of a sort of core audience of the people who are paying most attention to New York politics, and that enables sort of a lot of impact of the stories. And then as we're growing, we're trying to expand that circle of what it means to be a New York insider. And yeah,
great. Rozina, you're focusing on a more collaborative form of journalism. You go out, you find communities, you involve yourself with them. This is a new model, which you've sort of been one of the pioneers of getting that impact through. Can you take us through what brought that new way of thinking how journalism can work?
I mean, the Bureau has a long time history of innovation since before my day, and we do UK investigations, international investigations, and local investigations. And I really wanted to start with a quote by Terry Albury, who was on a panel at the Logan Symposium where Akash and I were last week. He's the FBI whistleblower. He said, "The fire has always been there, we just haven't been paying attention." And I think there are fires across every constituency across the UK. And so accountability journalism really matters. And the thing that really I think about is, who are we working alongside in order to surface the stories? Often we might parachute into locality to tell the story where we know what the top line is. And yet, if you go into communities and ask the questions, that will inform where the accountability gap is. So, one, there is an editorial reason for doing what we do. And the second is, I was really struck by Anand on the first panel who was talking about audience relevance. We have a crisis in trust in public institutions in the UK. That's across politics, that's also across the media. People feel disenfranchised. I was running the largest network newsroom outside of London. I started that job on the week of the EU referendum for the BBC. We were an output that was very close to the audience, and so we felt that the vote would go Brexit. I'm not making a political point, but politics is about policy, and policy is about people. So unless we are actively working with people, not to follow an agenda, but to follow the facts, we're not going to bring them along with us. And civic engagement, skills, spotting mis and disinformation has never been more important. So there is a way of approaching journalism that can be meaningful and holistic and not worthy, but actually community trust is everything, especially today.
What I like seeing about the stories which you've all created is that they can impact on laws, on investigations, they can bring about a change in agenda and thoughts. But particularly, Andrew, let's come back to your probably the most celebrated story. Can you tell us about what happened with the flag?
We brought it down, which is the first, so inspired by so much of what Sir Harry said today. We took power to account. This Confederate flag, for those of you who don't know your American history too well, which I totally understand why you wouldn't, but this Civil War in America 150 years ago, middle of the 19th century, the Civil War is still being fought in Mississippi on many different levels. And the flag on top of the state capitol was a perfect example of where Mississippi stood on the Civil War. They won, the rest of the country's narrative notwithstanding. And so we went about trying to get into the middle of that culture war. It wasn't just a political war. It was really about who wants this and why do you want it. And the deeper we got into it, because once you really get into it, you learn what people really are thinking about their neighbors, what they really think about the state. And in local news, a lot of power runs through sports, and it was the athletes in Mississippi who helped bring down the flag with us in the state capitol, getting every vote counted and getting every representative and senator to be transparent about their vote. So that was the public service.
Which also put your journalism on the map, didn't it? I mean, it was great prizes, there was great acclaim, there was a change in the agenda.
Yeah, and with that change, you get opportunity.
Yeah.
And you develop a relationship with your audience, which I'm sure Akash and Rozina know. That level, the relationship you have with the community, and a sense that you are of the people, for the people, with the people, by the people, that you live there. You care about them. And they often don't really understand what you do, what a reporter does.
But also sometimes these stories are staring, I mean, the flag was literally staring you in the face. Sometimes it's more difficult. Akash, you did this incredible story which investigated how this secret committee of senators decided which bills were put through. And this was unaccounted for, unknown, unwritten about. How the hell did you stumble across this great story?
Our tagline is "Who Runs New York?" Lee Harris, who's a reporter at the Financial Times and a co-founder of Focus, and I think is in the audience, coined the tagline. And it's really what we aim to do with all of our stories, to uncover who is wielding power, who is making decisions, by what means, and on behalf of whose interests, and with what consequences for ordinary New Yorkers. And this was an example of answering that question. New York, one of the things that when new reporters start at Focus, they're always sort of flabbergasted to encounter is they'll be reporting on the legislative process, and they'll call up lawmakers, being like, what's going on? And very often the conversation will turn where the lawmakers will ask them, what's the status of negotiations? Because in New York, rank and file lawmakers have virtually no power. There is no public deliberation or debate around legislation in the New York State Capitol.
Tell us about this little cabal.
Sure, yeah. And so the real decisions that are made are what makes it to the floor. And the answer at the end, at the sort of jam-packed end of each legislative session, is this secret group of New York State senators in the New York State Senate meet in private. They don't make their agendas public. They are not public as an entity. They weren't known about before our story, and decide what makes it to the floor. And they decide on the fate of hundreds of bills. And one person that we talked to who's defending the process said, well, if it was public, they would be bombarded with requests, and input around these bills. Imagine that, lawmakers being bombarded with input around bills. And I was very proud that in the wake of the story, we got a call from one of these offices saying, we've been flooded with calls this week about the bills that we're considering.
That was a huge achievement, right? Rozina, can we talk about what you call the impact model newsroom and what that means and how, because the choice of an editor in promoting subjects, topics, how it's covered is crucial to an organization's flavor, momentum, modus. You've slightly, again, reinvented that. Can you kind of take us through?
Well, the Bureau was co-founded by Elaine Potter, who worked for Sir Harry on the Insight team. She was the pioneer behind the thalidomide exposure. And so when the Bureau was founded, it was founded to spark change. We're not a campaigning newsroom. We don't really do advocacy. We are independent. We follow the facts. But ultimately, we want our journalism to be able to shift the dial in order to drive fairer outcomes. And there are two examples, our thorough investigation and our hot homes investigations. are exact examples of how you can drive impact through journalism, because otherwise, what's the point? You know, we are here to serve our audiences, and we are here to, you know, shine a light on truth and to essentially right wrongs.
To take us through Southwark, what happened in Southwark?
So Southwark it was the first of our community-led pilots. We wanted to test out working with communities in a way that would essentially change our sort of news gathering model, commissioning model, and telling the story. And, you know, everybody cares about climate, and yet if you were to go into a specific locality and ask how climate change is affecting their lives, I'm not sure many people would really know how to answer, but we knew it was a problem. The Committee for Climate Change in 2019 in the UK had flagged that there was a problem with UK housing, and yet there was no data really to evidence what that might mean. So we worked with London residents, Glasgow University, to monitor over a number of weeks what the impact of the summer's weather was doing to people inside their own homes. Paul Eccles, who's one of the reporters, is here today. He was part of that investigation. All of those 40 houses recorded temperatures of 25 degrees, which is the maximum for London set by the WHO. 10 of those homes recorded temperatures of 30 degrees. And this was in a period where the media was saying, where is the summer weather gone? You know, these are people who were demonstrating health, the health impact and recording those health impacts.
And what was the result of the reporting?
So the result of the investigation was that Southwark Council said that they would essentially ring-fence £1 million for adaptations to housing for their residents. So that was a good outcome for us. You know, £1 million will go some way. We have to sort of track whether they will actually do that. But that needed to be done. We actually wanted to work in 3 locations, including Sheffield and Birmingham. We only had the money to do it in one location. But, you know, climate change is something that is affecting housing around the UK.
But all these stories were when some of us were growing up, you know, the local newspaper was the place where this was going to happen. Like my first job was on the South East London and Kentish Mercury in Deptford, then the poorest borough in London. And you know, there were things like the New Cross fire and the Deptford fire, which were, it was ignored by the mainstream newspapers, as it was a terrible tragedy affecting black communities. And again, there was an element of adventure and romance, which I think is always a part of the successful sense of journalism. You know, we deal in stories, we deal in people, we try and find villains, we try and show heroes. I can remember almost the opposite journey what you've taken. I used to go up, work from 9 till 6 on the Mercury, and then get the train up to Fleet Street and work on the Daily Mail from 7 till 2 in the morning, thinking that was the way up. You've gone the opposite direction. You've been at the top, and now you've taken the train down. You know,
I love that train, actually. Yeah. I'm glad to be where I am.
And it's what a great place to be.
Yeah.
How do you make it work financially? How does it? Because finance in journalism is not always spoken about, even though we've seen the detrimental effect when owners will cave in to politics and let principle fly out the window.
Is that a clever way of asking me what the business model is?
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, by way of preface to that, it's a good question. There never was a more crucial time to be chasing investigative reporting. There never was particularly in local news, particularly there, because there it is lost in some of the ways that you were describing a moment ago. And then, more importantly, the core problem we all have, all of us in this
is the escalator pitch.
Yeah.
How do you get the money?
Yeah, I'm coming to it. With respect, you get the money because you have good quality investigative journalism. And the only way you get that is by sharing with your audience what are the facts, what is the fiction.
Okay.
And that's a fight. No, let me get to your business model question. Because we're in nonprofit, you see.
Okay.
So there's a difference. I'm passing a tin cup here at the end of the end of this conversation. But all that said, you rely on making your case over who you are and what you're doing. Most importantly, what you're doing to national foundations, to family foundations.
So you reap riches through reputation. Akash, can you tell me how you you're very digitally based, and having been at the Independent for the last 2 years, I know data is crucial. We look to where the story is being searched. We look to what people are interested in. We bring the story to them at the time they want to see it. Is that how it works with you, in terms of cash and in terms of trying to find the audience?
Oh, in terms of to what extent is the money dependent on the audience? It is, but honestly, all three of us are at nonprofit outlets. I think there is much less of a connection between. There's much less of a direct connection between finance and audience, which has advantages. It enables us to pursue investigative work that won't always be the most read, and has disadvantages. It can make a lot of nonprofit journalism is sort of it can be boring, can be long and wonky and meaty, and can have difficulty connecting to audiences, I think.
That slightly worries me, because I always remember Aubrey Moore talking about connection with journalism. If you drop a penny down a well, if you don't hear the echo, you're a bit worried. So to write for a publication where people don't read it is always a bit dispiriting for the journalists.
Right, absolutely. I mean, right, I'm just sort of, and I think it is, and I think everyone in the sector is also concerned about audience, but just about that question about the link between money and audience.
Clearly, you've cracked it in that you do find an audience, and that you are more than surviving, you're thriving. So it's fantastic. We are down to the last 2 minutes. Rozina, is money a factor in determining how you can do what you need to do?
Well, I have two answers. I have the romantic view, which is, we are here driven by purpose. Journalists are driven by a moral purpose and a duty, and that's what we follow. So, the second is about hustle. When I came into the job, I hadn't run a business before, but you learn to hustle. And the third is there is a determination to find every which way to keep going, whether that's membership, whether that's philanthropy, whether that's high worth individuals. You just have to find a way to do it. And there are ways of learning from each other. But also, I would say in today's sort of geopolitical climate, it's more important than ever. So, we keep going. And I think the spirit of Harry is sort of within us all. We can't just walk away. We're not driven by the people who give us the money, but, we are driven by what we need to do, and there is a lot to do right now.
Yeah. I always think, in a way, a recipe which I always hold out for journalism and for conversations is it should have the language of the pub, the profundity of the philosopher, the projection of the acrobat, and the passion of the artist. But as we are here today, we also need the power of the truth. And we've got three titans of truth. Can you please thank them very much indeed?